Alright, all you third shift racers out there, welcome back to Under the Radar. And this week's Stunts of the Week, which is 3 of them for the first time in a long time, folks, comes from the creators Chris Advance with his stunt Cavallo Morto, and from Maya Dadson with their stunt Stuntman 2, and finally pulling up the rear for these triple-decker of Stunts of the Week is Haru Sushi with her stunt Project 32. And the reason why we picked these 3 stunts? Well, for the first one, anybody who is able to jump out of a plane almost like something out of an action movie that made the maestro quote Air Force One saying, "Get off my plane," is an awesome stunt in our book. And the reason why for the second stunt, anybody who is able to use a fast car as a ramp while driving another fast car, all while listening to the soothing tones of Kenny Loggins while doing so without getting injured, another star in our book. And to the final stunner, the reason why that made it in, folks, well, anybody who can land a jet plane on the back of a flatbed truck is a winner in our books as well. So we got 3 winners in a big time oversized portion of this show. And speaking of big time things, folks, I think it's time for us to get ready to rev our engines and see who was the best of the best for this month of Foolhardy Fools as we get ready to go into a very special edition of the GTA Online Top 10 Tracks of the Month. And the first track that we have up comes from the creator, KM Creator, with their said track, KM Face to Face Pros. And this track made it in for the Tracks of the Week, not only because it's probably one of the most craziest point-to-point transformation tracks we've done to date, but also because, yeah, let's just say that the chances of a mid-air collision is high during this said track, especially if you get in the Batmobile at any point during this said race. And the only tip of advice we have for you race fans out there for this track, like we said before, is don't get lapped. For the love of God, don't get lapped during this track, because if you do, let's just say it's gonna be really hard to recover. And also watch your speed while you're heading down this ramp too, because there's gaps in between, which leaves plenty of room for error. So watch your step and don't get lapped. I can't stress that enough. And the next track to make it in for this elite list for this month comes from the creator Moini16 with their said track, Vertical Insanity 1. And the reason why in the world this track made it in for these Tracks of the Month for this month is not only because of the high vertical leap that you have to take during the said track, or more or less vertical drive, but also it gives you the option of sports classics, compacts, coupes, muscles, off-road, sedan, sports, or even supercars to do so. And the only tip of advice we have for you fans out there for this said track is when you're going down that giant oversized ramp to make your way toward that finish line, is to make sure you don't try to overtake your opponent or knock them off the ramp unless you have good handling on that ramp. Because if you don't, let's just say you will fall down, crashing down the earth in the most painful way known possible that will cost you during this said race. And the next track that we have up for this month comes from the creator Moini16 with their said track, Vertical Insanity number 4. And before we tell you guys why this track made it in, this track, along with the other track that we mentioned from Moini16, would break a record of its own for this said show, being the only track series that was fully mentioned during all of the Tracks of the Month that was mentioned upon, which is a record within itself, so congratulations Moini16. And on top of that, speaking of records, the fact that this ramp is the longest vertical ramp on GTA with a pinball twist to it, and the fact that you get a chance to use muscles and sports cars on this track, which is a lap race, which is really insane, is the reason why in the world this track made it in for the tracks of the month. And the only tip of advice we have for you fans out there while going down one of the longest ramps in the history of Grand Theft Auto Online is to hold on to your underwear like Hoagie Gilligan would say in Kids Next Door, and make sure if you're trying to take your opponent on while going down that ramp that you don't lose control yourself while going down it, because it's a long, and I do mean long, way down, and unless you know how to land on your wheels like a glove, it'll be a painful way down that will cost you during this very race. So yeah, just be careful. And the next track that we have up comes from the creator Genopia with his said track G-Twisted Eightful. And the reason why in the world this track made it in for this month's track of the month, well, not only because you get a chance to use all cars across the board with the exception of utility vehicles and the vehicles with weapons attached to them, but it's also a very simple and fun track. And not to mention the upper part of the Eightful has no barrier, which means a lot of shenanigans and hijinks can happen during this said race if you have enough people to race in it. So the only tip of advice we have for you fans out there while traveling under or over that pass for the Eightful is to watch out for traffic. Cause since there's no barricades for any of these parts of this race, there's a high possibility that a car will fly up the ramp or down the ramp or anywhere in between during this Eightful race that will cost you if you're not paying attention. So stay sharp out there, kids. And the next track that we have up comes from, once again, Genopia with his said track, G-Turbine Speedway. And the reason why this track made it in for the tracks of the month, not only because it reminds me, strangely enough, of a street luge track that you would see in at least 2 Extreme or 3 Extreme, or even 4 Extreme if it existed, but it's also a very high-octane, high fast-paced track that you can do with just about every car across the board with the exception of utility vehicles and vans for this said track. And the only tip of advice we have for you fans out there for this high-octane track that can pass you by in less than 35 seconds or more is to make sure you pick a car with good handling and don't try to take out your opponent on the curves for this race. Cause if you miss like I did, there's a high possibility you will fly out of this said track and lose your chance for that checkered flag during this said race. Because one false move and you will be lapped during this said track. So be careful. And the next track that we have up once again comes from Genopa with his said track, G Rainforest Rally. And I just realized we've been calling him Genopia for all these years, but it was just G-Nopa with no I in there. But nevertheless, still an amazing feat for him to be featured 3 times during the tracks of the month, so congratulations. And the reason why this track made it in for this month is because of the fact that it's absolutely insane that you get a chance to not only race through a makeshift set of trees in a forest that he created himself with the help of Grand Theft Auto Online in there as well, but also a split path that you can take to try to race your opponent to the finish line, which is absolutely insane and cool that he was able to pull it off for the said track. And the only tip of advice we have for you fans out there for this said track is be careful and pick a car with good handling while you're traveling through those trees in the woods. And the maestro said, why in the world am I telling everybody to be careful during these said tracks? Well, if you make one false move, your car might explode. And no, Maestro, that wasn't a reference to speed, but I'm glad you're paying attention to all the references I may make during these tracks of the week. But that was a good one. I probably might use that next time. But besides movie references that I use during certain parts of these shows, folks, the next track that we have up for the tracks of the month for this month comes from the creator Kugel724 with their said track, Tech Swamp Thing. And the reason why in the world we decided to pick this track for this month, not only because it's half stadium race with a steeplechase-like jump in between that reminds me of something out of Wario Stadium, but it also includes a makeshift swamp during this said track that leaves you actually bogged down in the water. And not to mention, if you don't pick the right car during this track, could definitely cost you the lead. So the only tip of advice we have for you guys and gals out there for this said track is to just make sure you pick a car that is high enough off the ground to not get caught in that water, but at the same time fast enough to make it over the jumps, and you should be just fine. Yeah, we hope. Anyway, folks, the next track, speaking of water-like situations, comes from the creator Roar76 with their said track, Cassidy Creek Raceway. And the reason why this track made it in for this month, besides giving you a multitude of different options to pick from, exception of, I guess, utility vehicles for this said track, is the fact that it also is another one of those tracks with no barriers and a chance for you to fall into the river at a moment's notice while racing in it. And if you don't believe me, ask my friend Jay Meeks, he'll tell you firsthand. And the only tip of advice I have for you fans out there who wants to race on this track but is afraid of falling into that water while doing so is to make sure you stay on the outer part of the curve if you don't know how to properly drift or turn for this set track. Because if you try to go in the inner part of the turn for any of these dead man-like curves, there's a high possibility you can fall in the water, and I got a feeling if you have friends like I do, yeah, be careful on those curves because they may try to knock you in the water as well. You know, just a heads up. And the next track that we have up comes from the creator Odin 20008 with his said track, Transformation Cross Race. And the reason why this track made it in for this month, folks, is because, well, it's a giant oversized transformation race that'll have you in land, air, and even sea-like situations during this said race. And the only tip of advice I have for you fans out there is to make sure you pick the best off-road car for the job, because if you don't, chances are you're going to get passed up by your opponent and it's going to be really hard to recover, especially with all the transformation cars that are featured during this said race. Which, by the way, one of them is an Oppressor Mark I, which may give you a chance to catch up. So don't give up during this race as well. And finally, last but not least, the last track that we have up for the tracks of the month for this month comes from the creator Woogie with his said track, WW Somna Raceway. And the reason why in the world we decided to pick this track that is an almost exact replica of the raceway itself is because you get a chance to pick every car across the board as you cruise along in this awesomely cool track that he decided to make dedicated to the said raceway that was formerly named after the Sears Point Raceway. Yeah, nice. And the only tip of advice we have for you fans out there is don't try to cut corners during this said track, because there are certain points during this said track that there are little slowdown parts that will catch you if you try to skip the curve for these said tracks. So to put it simply, folks, stay within the lines. Like you're coloring in a coloring book, just stay within the lines. And I guess with that said, folks, for this month, it wraps it up for a very special double-decker edition of the GTA Online Top 10 Tracks of the Month. And the tracks that we all listed will be featured in a giant Megalodon-like playlist before the end of this week, folks. So don't worry, it'll be out there, and chances are it will be named the Month of Foolhardy Tracks. That's if it can fit in the bar. And I guess with that said, we might as well go ahead and grab a glass of water, and when we return, we'll be back with the final segment for Under the Radar for this week, right after this. So don't get lost in the madness just yet, folks, and stay tuned.